Pokrovsk is being squeezed in the most dangerous way modern war can produce. Not by one strike that makes everything collapse at once, but by slow, heavy pressure repeated day after day. In Donetsk, some battles do not create one explosive moment on the map, but they still change the entire rhythm of the battlefield. Pokrovsk is becoming one of those battles. Russia is not only attacking the city from a distance. Moscow is trying to push pressure through the surrounding villages, through small roads, and through every patch of ground that leads toward Ukraine's logistics. Infantry is being sent forward again and again. Small mechanized groups are trying to open new routes. Stronger units are being pulled in to keep the offensive tempo alive. But the more pressure Russia brings into this area, the colder the question becomes. Is Russia really moving toward a breakthrough? Or is it being pulled into the kind of battle where every step forward costs too many men, too much equipment, and too much time? That is why Pokrovsk is no longer just the story of one hotspot in Donetsk. It is becoming a test for both sides. How long Russia can sustain the attack and how far Ukraine can turn that pressure into attrition. So what is making the battle for Pokrovsk more dangerous than it looks? And why could this sector reveal the next direction of the entire war in eastern Ukraine? Let's find out with Military Force. Pokrovsk is becoming the place where Russia is trying to turn pressure into a larger result in Donetsk. The city is not only another name on the Eastern Front. It sits in a battle space that links nearby towns, supply roads, troop movement, and defensive positions west of the main fighting line. For Ukraine, this area helps hold the shape of the defense in western Donetsk. For Russia, taking control around it would mean more than a local gain. It would create a stronger platform to push toward Mirnorid, Rodinske, and the routes behind Ukrainian positions. Ukrainian reports say Russia has concentrated more than 100,000 troops in the Pokrovsk sector, with some Ukrainian media placing the figure near 106,000. And that number should be treated carefully because it comes from Ukraine and is difficult to verify in real time. Still, the scale of the reported buildup shows how seriously Moscow views this direction. A force of that size is not gathered only to pressure one street or one trench. It is meant to stretch the defender, keep attacks coming, and force Ukraine to spend reserves in a sector that Russia wants to make decisive. The problem for Russia is that mass alone has not yet produced a clear operational break. A large attacking force can create danger, but it must still move through roads, towns, fields, and ruined urban edges where defense can slow every step. This is why Pokrovsk matters. It turns raw numbers into a harder question about command, timing, supply, and staying power. If Moscow cannot turn pressure into movement at the right speed, the weight of its own offensive can become harder to manage. This also explains why the fight around Pokrovsk carries political meaning beyond the map. Russia wants to show that its campaign in Donetsk is still moving forward, while Ukraine wants to prove that heavy pressure can be absorbed without losing control of the wider defensive system. Every reported buildup near the city, every effort to push toward nearby settlements, and every attempt to pull Ukrainian reserves into the sector belongs to that larger contest. The real issue is not whether Russia can attack. It clearly can. The issue is whether those attacks can become a breakthrough before the cost becomes too high. That is the tension at the heart of this stage. Pokrovsk shows a battlefield where Russia has the manpower to keep pushing, but Ukraine still has enough structure to deny a quick collapse. The next layer is the village belt around the city, where small settlements and roads begin to decide the real pace of the campaign before any larger move can take shape on the wider Donetsk front at all. The village belt around Pokrovsk is now shaping the battle more than the city center itself. Russia is not only trying to push straight into Pokrovsk, it is working around the city through settlements, roads, fields, and tree lines that can open new angles of pressure. Rodinske, Novoalexandrivka, Prishin, Udakne, Muravka, and Molodetska form a tactical ring where a small gain can change the next route of attack. These names may look minor on a map, but on the ground they decide how troops move, where vehicles can hide, and which roads remain useful today. Each village near Pokrovsk carries value because it can support the next move. A force that enters a settlement can watch nearby roads, shorten its own supply line, shelter assault teams, and bring drones closer to Ukrainian positions. The size of the village is not the main issue. The real issue is what that village allows a unit to do after it gets there. A ruined street can become cover. A tree line can hide movement. A road junction can become the path for the next infantry push. This is why the battle around Pokrovsk is being decided in small pieces before any larger result appears. Prishine shows this pattern clearly. Ukrainian sources say Russian infantry has tried to press through the area, while other groups have looked for a route through open ground toward Vasilivka. That means Russia is testing more than one approach. One group creates direct pressure, while another tries to stretch the defense from the side. Even if the movement is limited, it can still force Ukraine to watch more ground, spend more ammunition, and hold more positions at the same time. The danger for Ukraine grows when these villages begin to affect supply movement. Ammunition, food, fuel, replacement troops, and medical evacuation all need roads that remain usable under fire. If Russian units move close enough to observe or strike those routes, the cost of holding Pokrovsk rises. The city can still be defended, but every supply run becomes more risky. A road that worked yesterday may become exposed today. A medical route may need to change after one drone team moves closer. A reserve unit may arrive late because the approach road is under constant artillery threat. This is why a foothold near Pokrovsk can matter even before it becomes a major territorial gain. It can become an observation point, a drone launch area, a mortar position, or a staging place for the next assault group. In this kind of battle, terrain is measured by function. The question is not only who controls a village, the question is what that village lets the next unit see, hit, or threaten. Russia's pressure around the village belt also forces Ukraine to defend in several directions at once. If Russian units move near Rodinska, the northern approach becomes more dangerous. If pressure grows near Prishine, Ukraine must protect the link between local defense positions and the roads behind them. If attacks continue near Udakny, Muravka, and Molodetske, the western and southwestern approaches remain under stress. This pattern does not require one dramatic attack to create danger. It can create pressure by making the defender respond again and again across a wide area. That is why the village ring matters so much. Russia is trying to turn each settlement into a step toward Pokrovsk and toward the supply routes that keep Ukraine's defense alive. Ukraine must stop those steps before they connect into a wider threat. As the map breaks into villages, road junctions, and tree lines, Russia's method becomes clearer. The next stage is not one sudden blow, but many small assaults designed to wear down the line piece by piece right now. That pressure now defines the hidden logic of the battle. Russian pressure is now built less around one dramatic breakthrough and more around repeated assaults that test the Ukrainian line hour after hour. Instead of waiting for a single armored thrust to decide the sector, Russian forces are using infantry groups and small mechanized elements to keep constant contact with Ukrainian positions. This method creates a rhythm of danger. A group moves toward a village edge, a tree line, or an open field. Another group follows from a different angle. A light vehicle may support the movement, but the attack often depends on men crossing exposed ground under fire. Ukrinform reported that Ukrainian defenders stopped 32 Russian assault attempts during the same period described in the transcript. That number matters because it shows the tempo of the fight. One assault can be contained. 32 attempts in one sector can force a defender to stay alert across many hours, protect several approaches, move ammunition forward, rotate crews, and decide when to reveal firing positions. Russia may not need each attempt to succeed. It needs enough pressure to make Ukraine spend energy, shells, drones, and attention. This is why small assault groups have become important in the Russian method. They can probe weak points with less risk to large armored columns. They can move through broken terrain where heavy vehicles would be easier to target. They can test whether a Ukrainian trench, building, or firing line is still active. If one group is stopped, another can be sent toward a nearby gap. The process is slow, but it keeps the defense under strain. The weakness of this method is the human cost. Infantry groups without strong armored protection are exposed before they reach close combat range. They must cross ground that can be watched, shelled, mined, or struck by drones. If the first soldiers are hit or pinned down, the following group may lose direction. If a light vehicle is disabled, the men around it can become trapped in the same fire zone. This turns a cheap assault on paper into an expensive action in reality, especially when the same pattern is repeated day after day. The tactical aim is not always to capture a large area immediately. Russia is trying to tire the defense, force Ukraine to respond many times, and find a small opening that can be expanded later. This is pressure by repetition. It is designed to make the defender make mistakes, use reserves too early, or leave one approach weaker than the others. Even limited movement can become useful if it reveals where Ukraine is strong and where the line is thinner. For Ukraine, the challenge is to stop these assaults without wasting too much firepower on every small group. If defenders fire too early, they may reveal positions. If they wait too long, Russian infantry may reach cover. That balance makes the battle difficult, even when individual attacks are repelled. Pokrovsk is therefore not only a fight of territory. It is a fight of rhythm, endurance, and control over the next move. This explains why the real measure of the battle is not simply whether Russia moves forward on a given day. The sharper question is how much Moscow must spend in men, vehicles, time, and command effort for each small gain. As the attacks continue, that cost becomes the bridge to the next issue facing Russia around Pokrovsk. Pressure may remain strong, but progress becomes harder to justify when the price keeps rising. Russia is still applying heavy pressure around Pokrovsk, but the visible result remains limited when measured against the reported cost. Ukrainian linked estimates claim that Russian forces lost more than 2,600 soldiers during 3 days of fighting while gaining only a few kilometers. That figure cannot be verified independently in real time, so it should be treated carefully. Still, it points to the central problem of this sector. Moscow can keep attacking, but every small movement forward appears to demand a high payment in men, vehicles, command effort, and time. This is where the difference between an advance and a breakthrough becomes important. An advance means a force moves forward. A breakthrough means the defender loses control of the line, reserves are pulled out of position, and the attacker gains freedom to move deeper. Around Pokrovsk, Russia may still capture small pieces of ground, but Ukraine has not shown the kind of collapse that would turn those gains into a decisive operational result yet. Movement on the map can look impressive, but the military meaning depends on whether that movement breaks the defender's system or not. The reported movement of Russia's 90th Tank Division toward the Pokrovsk area shows that Moscow is still trying to keep offensive tempo alive. Ukrainian sources, including reports cited by Ukrinform and UNN, said this formation had appeared or was being built up near the sector. Such a move matters because a stronger formation can help sustain pressure after lighter assault groups have taken losses. It can bring more command structure, heavier weapons, logistical depth, and trained crews to a fight that is already consuming manpower quickly. But a tank division in this war does not always mean a long column of tanks driving straight into a city. The battlefield around Pokrovsk is too exposed for that simple image. A large formation can be divided into smaller elements, with some supporting infantry, some protecting staging areas, some helping artillery coordination, and some holding command posts behind the assault line. In other words, its value may be less about one dramatic armored charge and more about keeping many parts of the Russian attack machine working at the same time. This creates a difficult picture for both sides. Russia still has enough force to make the sector dangerous, and Ukraine cannot treat the pressure as symbolic. A formation such as the 90th Tank Division can help Moscow replace exhausted units, organize follow-up attacks, and keep local commanders supplied with more options. That means Pokrovsk will not become easier simply because earlier assaults were costly. Heavy losses can slow an offensive, but they do not always stop it if the command is willing to feed more units into the same direction. At the same time, the need for stronger units also reveals a limit. If Russia must commit better formations just to maintain pressure and gain small amounts of ground, the operation becomes harder to justify over time. The question is no longer whether Russia can attack. It can. The sharper question is whether each gain weakens Ukraine more than it drains Russia. That balance will decide the next stage of the Pokrovsk fight, especially as the battlefield is increasingly shaped by constant observation, drones, and precision strikes. Drone surveillance has changed the risk of every infantry assault. A unit no longer becomes vulnerable only when it reaches a trench or a village edge. It can begin losing the fight as soon as a Ukrainian UAV detects its direction, speed, spacing, and stops along the route. Movement itself creates data. A group crossing open ground can reveal its assault line. A vehicle stopping near a tree line can reveal a staging point. A gap between soldiers can show confusion inside the formation. Once those details are seen, they can be passed to artillery crews, mortar teams, or FPV operators waiting for a target. This makes every approach route part of the battlefield before contact even begins. The fighting around Hryshine shows how this system can work. Ukrainian sources say defenders used artillery, aviation, FPV drones, and small arms against Russian forces. That combination is important because it shows that the trap is not one weapon. It is a chain of observation and firepower. First, a UAV finds movement before the assault reaches cover. Then artillery or mortars can strike the approach route and slow the group. After that, FPV drones can hit a vehicle, a cluster of infantry, or soldiers pinned near a building or field line. If attackers reach the village edge, small arms in close combat can finish the fight at shorter range. This sequence makes infantry assaults without strong armored support especially dangerous. The soldiers may still move forward, but they are moving through a space that is already being measured. Their route, timing, and pauses can all become part of the targeting process. In older battles, cover could hide enough movement to keep an assault alive. Around Pokrovsk, cover still matters, but it no longer guarantees safety when UAVs are watching from above. Ukraine is trying to extend this pressure beyond the immediate assault line. Reuters has reported that Ukrainian medium-range strikes have targeted Russian air defense, radar, communications, and logistics from 30 to 180 kilometers behind the front. That detail matters because the assault group at the front depends on systems behind it. If radar is damaged, drones become harder to stop. If logistics are hit, supplies arrive later. If communications are disrupted, commanders lose time. This wider pressure changes the meaning of defense around Pokrovsk. Ukraine does not have to answer every Russian attack with a large mechanized counterattack. It can slow the assault at the front, strike the support network behind it, and make the whole operation harder to sustain. The goal is not only to destroy one unit in one field. The goal is to weaken the chain that allows Russia to keep sending units forward. That is why drone warfare has become central to this battle. It turns the front into a monitored zone, and it turns the rear into a vulnerable support system. When Ukraine can damage both, Kyiv gains another option before any major counteroffensive begins. Ukraine's strategy around Pokrovsk is moving toward controlled attrition, not a large mechanized counterattack. This choice reflects the reality of the current battlefield. A heavy counterattack would need to cross minefields, survive artillery, avoid glide bombs, and move under Russian reconnaissance. In that environment, armor can lose value quickly if it is forced into predictable routes. Kyiv therefore has a different priority. It tries to hold the defensive belt, slow each Russian push, and make every assault cost more than the ground it gains. This does not mean Ukraine is fighting from comfort. Donetsk has become a long contest of manpower, ammunition, rotation, repair, and supply. Units need shells, drones, fuel, evacuation routes, fresh soldiers, and working communications. If any part of that chain weakens, the line becomes harder to hold. Russia faces the same problem from the other side, but with a different method. Moscow still has more manpower in many sectors, and it can keep sending infantry and small mechanized groups forward. The danger for Russia is that pressure becomes expensive when each move requires more people, more equipment, and more support from the rear. The purpose of Ukraine's attrition strategy is to change the cost calculation. Instead of trying to win every meter back immediately, Ukraine aims to damage the forces that Russia needs for the next assault. A Russian unit that takes losses today may still hold a patch of ground, but it may have fewer trained soldiers for tomorrow. A damaged vehicle may not decide the battle alone, but it can weaken the next movement. A disrupted supply route may not stop an attack instantly, but it can slow the tempo of the entire sector. This is why Pokrovsk matters beyond the city itself. The battle is becoming a test of endurance between Russia's ability to keep feeding the offensive and Ukraine's ability to make that offensive less efficient each day. Russia will likely continue using infantry assaults, small mechanized groups, and drone-supported attacks to keep pressure on the sector. Ukraine will likely keep relying on observation, corrected fire, FPV strikes, and deeper attacks on support systems to reduce that pressure. The final question is no longer only who holds the ground today. It is which side can keep fighting at this cost when the battle becomes longer, heavier, and harder to sustain under growing pressure from weather, fatigue, and constant battlefield losses. Pokrovsk now stands as a measure of endurance, not only a contest for ground. Russia can still press the sector with manpower, artillery, and fresh assault groups, but pressure only matters if it produces a result that changes the wider campaign. So far, the battle shows a harder reality. Every move forward must pass through villages, exposed roads, watched fields, and supply routes that Ukraine is trying to turn into a costlier problem for Moscow. The next phase will likely remain slow, violent, and difficult to read from the map alone. Russia may keep attacking around Hryshyn, Rodinske, Udakny, and the approaches behind Pokrovsk on every side of the city. Ukraine will try to keep the line connected, protect its logistics, and make each Russian push harder to repeat. The real question is no longer who attacks first. It is who can keep fighting longer when the price keeps rising. If this analysis helps make the battlefield clearer, consider liking the video, sharing it, and subscribing to Military Force. This channel studies weapons, battles, and geopolitical shocks not to glorify war, but to understand the real cost of conflict and the fragile value of peace. The more clearly war is understood, the harder it becomes to ignore the decisions that lead nations into it.